get out of here if she does.
Am I talking to you here, there?
Yes, so basically towards me, mate. So just start off your name first.
So I'm Jay, ex-Royal Marine, and then spent a total of about 18 years in service. Worked with the regiment at the back end of my career, the last sort of 12 years, and then retired about 2.5 years ago now. And I've been working as a firearms instructor since then, trying to sort of pass back that knowledge and all the lessons that I learned through my career. I was fortunate enough to be an instructor for a period of time, and sort of develop my passion through sort of firearms and tactical training through that. It's based on the importance of the basics. There's nothing fancy about what I do or teach. But again, it's just trying to cascade some of those hard lessons that I've been witness to and know other people have been through, and just try and capture some of that information and, try and pass it on to the next generation of people, whether that's law enforcement, SWAT teams, or, military units, just, people out there just trying to do good things and protect and serve their communities. It's a two-way thing. There's a selfish part of me that really, really enjoys that knowledge transfer and gives me a sense of identity and purpose, which I think when you leave the military, I think that's the two biggest problems that I've seen with people, is losing identity and purpose. And I think if you can maintain an element of that whilst not making it your entire persona, you've got to be able to move on from it, for a very long time in the military, especially the back end. When I was serving in a tier 1 unit, you kind of make your whole world revolves around the job, and rightly so. It revolves around being or trying to be the best operator that you can, and that's challenging because it's such a widespread skill set. But I think when you immerse yourself in a culture or a community or a way of life, because I do see it as a way of life, for a period of time, it can become your whole identity. And it's very difficult sometimes to see the wood for the trees and step out of that. And I think that's what scares a lot of guys into leaving the military, is because they don't know how to be them without having that around them. And that's something that I felt, seriously and acutely for a very long period of time. The sort of back end of my career, I would say, I was more worried about not being in the stack and, my time running out as an assaulter, than I was about any target or any situation that I was going to be put into, on a tactical level, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. But my biggest fear wasn't what was behind the door. It was when there was no more doors to go through, if that kind of makes sense. So that's why I think holding on to things like firearms and instruction and staying sort of semi-connected to that process has been super important to me mentally. And it sort of helped me through the transition, so to speak. But this time of year is always a weird one for me. It always has been. Remembrance Days, it's a bittersweet thing for me, and I think it is for a lot of the guys. Remembrance Day to me isn't just November the 11th. It's every single day, and not just for me. I remember that there are other people out there that have lost, way more than I ever could. There are wives that have lost husbands. There are kids that have lost dads. People have lost brothers, uncles, sisters, wives. Especially that sort of GWAT Afghan generation, whatever you want to call it. And it's not to say that generation is any different from any of the ones that have gone before it. The greatest generation, all the way up until the line of people that have sacrificed for this country it's incredibly long, and it's a very big list of people, a lot of names on that list from all different types of generations. I think, just speaking from personal experience, my generation, I think through that sort of time frame of all the the early Iraq tours, the Afghanistan tours, the Herricks, all of those, that whole process seems like a long time ago, but it doesn't seem very far away at times, if that makes sense. It feels very tangible, and you can, I certainly feel it a lot. And I do remember, you know, and I'm super grateful when things are good, just to be mindful that, you know, there's somebody out there, there's one of you, you know, potentially one of your teammates, or, you know, a family member of somebody that you knew that's probably not doing so well. So I think it is important to be mindful of remembrance all year round. I think we're very good as a nation at, you know, set pieces, you know, whether it's Remembrance Day or, you know, a coronation or, you know, whatever it might be. When we rally together as a country, we're incredibly passionate and incredibly patriotic. But I think we need to see, I would like to see, and, you know, it feels more like more daily stuff, you know. I remember a period of time where everyone had a Help for Heroes band on. I remember where the newspapers were full of, you know, stories about soldiers and soldiers' wives, and every single time one of the lads came back, you know, through Bryce Norton or Wootton Bassett or wherever it might have been, you know, thousands of people would line the streets. People would stop what they were doing, they would come out and they would pay their respects to the lads, the fallen people. And I'm not saying for one second that mentality isn't still there, but it's just a lot less visible these days. And for obvious reasons. I mean, we're not in a direct conflict with anybody. And the fact of the matter is that we're not bringing lads home in boxes on a regular basis, which is a good thing, right? But there's still a lot of people that are still sort of mentally stood on the side of the road there, you know, watching somebody come back. And, you know, I've done that on multiple occasions, and it's the same with the repatriations, you know, carrying people onto aircraft, you know, and then going back to work. You don't really get much time for remembrance there. It always comes afterwards, which I think is one of the reasons I've never really looked forward to Remembrance Day. I won't go into it too much, but I remember the last sort of 4 or 5, whilst I was in the military, there was always an option for us, just the way the rotation worked, was that somebody could go and pull guard, essentially. And I'd always do that. I don't know why, but I always felt more comfortable putting on my cry trousers and my plate carrier than I did putting on my uniform and my medals, if that makes sense. That I felt more connected to the process there. I felt like I was remembering the people that I'd lost and, you know, shared good times with. I think that felt like I was doing it my way, as opposed to standing there and doing the whole ceremony and the poppies and all the rest of it. You know.
Do you feel more connected being in that kit than more?
I think so.
Wearing your medals and ties?
Yeah, I mean, I don't wear my medal. I don't even know where my medals are, if I'm honest with you, and I don't think I'll ever wear my medals ever again. And that's not because I don't like the army or anything. It's just something that I've put to bed. It's in a box and it stays in that box, you know. But I'm not one for. I'll never wear a beret again. I might wear a green one eventually. But again, that's me. That's part of my process in sort of separating one part of my life from the next part of my life.
Closure.
It's closure for me, and I don't look back with any bitterness, believe it or not, or distaste or any sort of negativity towards my service. The back end of it, it ended in a sort of, I don't really want to talk about it too much because it does. It didn't go. There was some stuff that happened at the back end of my career which, you know, was less than ideal. But I don't put all of my military career into that. You know, a couple of individuals' actions or, you know, something that's out of my control. I do believe, and I honestly believe, that I can look myself in the mirror and, you know, when I see the person staring back at me, I know that person gave everything that he could for his country, and would willingly lay down his life for it, and would continue to do so. So I try and remember the positives from it as opposed to focusing on the negatives, which at times can be difficult, but for the most part, I think I do a good job of managing it. And I also want my daughter to see me being proud, you know. I don't want her to see me. There's no time for being, you know, for being negative about service. Like, it's just not something I want to do. But I guess for me, choosing not to wear my medals a lot, or, you know, even really acknowledge that I've earned them. I think I'm the same as a lot of guys. I think a lot of veterans feel like this, and I think it's a problem if you don't tackle it. I think a lot of us feel wrongly that we haven't done much, And that's not to say that I've done a lot, because I genuinely don't feel like I've done anything really. I just did what I was supposed to do when I was supposed to do it for the most part. I did the best I could, you know. But I get a lot of messages from guys, and it breaks my heart. Like, I get them so regularly now. It really does break my heart. It's like, I was just in the Marines for 4 years. I was just a para. I was like, oh, I just went into training, or I was just a driver in the RLC. It's like, it's not just, is it? You should never feel like that. Any person that's willing to walk into a careers office, if we're talking about the military, and say, yes, I would like to serve my country, I've got the ultimate respect for it. It doesn't matter if you were 2 weeks, you know, in basic infantry training, or you spent 20 years, you know, as the RSM of the parachute regiment. The level of respect I've got for the individual that's willing to do it is exactly the same. It's not trying to compare, you know, apples to oranges. I'm really not trying to do that. And I do, you know, I've got a deep appreciation of certain things and certain job roles and certain specs that I identify with. And I know, you know, I get that. I really do.
It takes courage with a bit of stupidity to sign that line, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Say the oath out.
Yeah.
To join the military.
Yeah, it really does. And I, you know, and I remember when I said the oath, I meant it. I meant every word. Yeah. And when I joined the military to go to war. That was why I went to join the Royal Marine Commandos, because I wanted to go to war, and I wanted to be with the best outfit that I could, that I thought at the time were going to have the most amount of effect on the battlefield. And I don't regret that decision one bit. But that was just a personal choice for myself. But, you know, there's a lot of other guys out there that might have done 4 years, or they've done, you know, a couple of years, or they didn't do a tour. You know, that's another one that breaks me, is like when guys go, oh, I never went anywhere, I didn't deploy. That you shouldn't discredit yourself for that. And, you know, I've done it my whole career. I still do it now. So I'm trying to, you know, it's poacher turned gamekeeper, isn't it, to a degree. But I think it's super important that guys don't undervalue the commitment that they made and the service that they made. It's the most patriotic thing that you could possibly do. You know, everyone's quick to sort of criticize patriotism sometimes, I think, these days, and it can be used negatively. But if you think about the most purest intentions of a young man or a young woman leaving the safety and the comfort of their, you know, their sort of emotional infrastructure, leaving their home, going off to do something that's extremely intimidating, which is just basic training. I don't care what anyone says, it is intimidating. You've got to have a certain level of self-confidence and courage, and selfless approach to do that. And just those qualities alone are fantastic qualities to have, regardless of whether you become, you know, an all-singing, all-dancing operator, or whether you spend, you know, 4 years counting blankets in a store. At that point, the qualities displayed are, you know, they're universal qualities, and I think it's very important that people remember that. I think also when it comes to Remembrance Day, and rightly so, we focus a lot on remembering the guys that aren't there, the guys that are no longer with us, the guys and the girls that have given the ultimate sacrifice, and they always should be, you know, paramount when it comes to the level of, you know, respect that they deserve, and the sort of admiration from the nation that they've earned. But I think it's also important to be mindful of remembering the guys that maybe necessarily didn't physically lose their life, but they might have mentally lost something there. I think, you know, there's definitely a part of my soul that's still in those fields in Afghanistan, for sure. And I know I'm not alone with that. I know there's loads of guys. In fact, I had a really close mate of mine at the time. I sort of lost that connection over years through the job that I went on to do. It was very busy, but sort of reached out to me the last couple of days. We were involved in a suicide attack in Afghanistan, in Sang, in 2010. And I'd always wondered, because I see his Instagram, you know, and I see it, and he's always like the most happy, smiley. He's got a beautiful family. He's got 2 gorgeous kids. He's got a lovely wife. Like, he's always out there smiling, you know, pictures in Disneyland. And I always think to myself subconsciously, it's like, wow, like that guy is absolutely, because he got blown up from as close to you are to me. that's how close he was when this kid was probably no older than 13, 14, detonated himself in front of him. And we'd been giving them sweets like minutes before, and they went out and he came back in and blew himself up. And I still think about that. I was on the other side of the wall. But I still think about that. So to have had eye contact with somebody that close in that sort of situation, and for them to detonate themselves trying to kill you, is that's a serious emotional thing to go through, you know? But on the surface, and this was 15 years ago, everything looks great, and then all of a sudden you get a message, you reach out, and it's like, yeah, I'm working through this, you know. The guy asked me if I had any pictures, you know, of that day, which I did. I shared with him, and you know, it's important to go back to my original point to remember that guys are still dealing with it. They're still working through these problems, and it might be 15, it might be 30, it might be 20 years down the line. But guys that were involved in some of these situations, in any warfighting situation, that level of trauma, that you know, how that hits the brain, it affects everybody differently. Some people can compartmentalize it completely. Some people can partially do it, some people don't do it at all, but everybody at some point is going to have to look back into that box. It's just how deep that box is buried and how willing you are to face it, because eventually it will come out. Like, there's no way around it. Like, it's inevitable. But it's important to me when guys do reach out, and it's important to me that, you know, you remember those good times as well, because for all the awful times that we shared on the battlefield, there were some really, really funny and good times, and that is important because that's the strength of a soldier, regardless of what cat badge you are or what conflict you served in. You ask any soldier, you know, you get a few of them round the table and, you know, give them a pint. Before you know it, it's more often than not the good times that are remembered, you know, the little things that happen, you know, the funny moments in time that you can never really share with anyone else, you know, unless that person was there, you know, that shared situation, that shared empathy, the shared trauma, you know, all of those things bond humans together real tight, you know, and it's important not to turn your back on that and to maintain that, something that I've been really bad at doing. Certainly the last sort of 15 years of my career or so, which is most of it, I never really looked backwards because I couldn't, you know, I was too busy going forwards. There was always something else to go and do, you know, and, you know, yeah, exactly. And mentally, I didn't want to put myself in those situations, but now I've retired, or I've left the military. It gives you a bit more time to think about stuff. And I genuinely don't have any things going on in my head that, you know, are really combat related. It's more to do with other things around it. But I need to focus and remember to focus on all the good times. You know, it's we've all done it. And, you know, for those guys that have deployed, or even if you haven't deployed, if you've been on a horrendous exercise somewhere, or, you know, you've been doing it, it's often than not, you forget how quickly, you quickly forget how awful it was. And you have this weird filter in your brain, and you'll remember that one funny thing, you know, when that guy fell over trying to climb a fence, or, you know, or when, you know what I mean?
I'll be on a stag and start hallucinating at about 3 a.m. because there's like people coming at you.
Yeah.
Screaming.
Yeah.
The lads come up and go, "What's up with you?" Like,
yeah.
I thought someone was coming. They're like, "Mate, you need to get some sleep."
Yeah, it's all that. It's them little things, isn't it? Like, lads, like, I know it sounds bad, but like, if someone has an ND in a harbour area when you recruit, like, I still remember that now. It's funny to me. Do you know what I mean? Or like, you know, when there was this kid, they're setting up a trip flare. And they was doing a trip flare demonstration. It was actually one of my best mates who was doing it with our troop sergeant, Baz Weston, who unfortunately lost his life in Afghanistan. But I'll always remember this. It was at the end of an exercise. It was a hard exercise. He'd smashed us, rightly so. We needed it. We were deploying a war. And we'd been given trip flares and we had been shown how to set them up. But for some reason, whatever it was, the pin hadn't been engaged. It was whatever it was, that the system that we were using at the time wasn't quite correct. So we pulled this guy, Dave, out and was showing him. But they had it set up like in... This is right at the end of the exercise, you must understand. So it's like, right, all the tent needs to be put down. Like, it's all admin now. It's officially index. It's like, put your weapons and you know where this is going. So it's like, I remember this kid, and mate, bless him, he had this big like brown crate, and it was like what the cadre or the DS, the corporals, the training team, whatever you want to call them, it was like, had bread in it, right? Or stuff like that, Tetley tea bags probably, and Kenko. It was all their stores from where they'd be living for the exercise. And everyone's running around. It's like, right, you've got 10 minutes to collapse this camp and then get on the white bus. Do you know what I mean? We've all been there. And they're doing this demonstration, but they're like in the prone position, and it's like super finesse. Like he's just you know what I'm talking? He's like trying to pull the thing down. The wire's been placed. He's got the 2 little pickets. You know what I mean? He's putting in the thing, and you could see it coming. And I was like, I could see it coming. We were like walking the opposite direction, and he's not seen the tripwire. And
don't say anything.
there was nothing. There was no time. There was no time, mate. Do you know what I mean? It's like. But both their heads were like next to this phosphorus trip flare, you know what I mean? Like that's a bad day. And you just see him and he just kicks this thing through and the whole thing goes up. Baz absolutely lost his mind. Dave was like, I don't know where to look. Like,
it's the silhouettes you see after it's fully lit up. You see the silhouettes.
Yeah. Honestly, mate, it was just one of those, like, and I don't know really why I'm thinking about this now, but it's just like these little moments in training, do you know what I mean? It's like, I remember those moments, and you know, that's an important part of the process of remembrance. It's not just the negative stuff. It's really important to be mindful, to focus on the positive things. You know, even in combat, I'll never forget the day we were literally in a harbour position with shellscapes we'd been getting mortared and shot at literally for hours, all day. And it was night time, and we posted sentries, and you know, you're going out to wake the next guy up, just like you would do on Woodbury Common in Lympstone. It's the first and only time I've ever actually employed those tactics real time, you know. But I'll never forget this again. Like, I was laughing about it with a friend of mine the other day. He's like, I went to wake this guy up. It was so cold, mate. It was freezing. It was a summer, but we were acclimated, right? We were used to it, and we weren't planning on staying out, so no one had any warm kit. And I remember waking up this geezer. He was from up north. Name was Mark. He was hard as woodpecker's lips, mate. He was an RMR lad, but he was a kickboxer. He was one of the best RMR lads. He was seamless. He was absolutely incredible. Great soldier. Good to be around. Like, completely got the ethos of the troop. He was an incredible dude. And he was bald, and he got up out of his shell scrape with an Ortlieb bag. Have you ever seen a man wear an Ortlieb bag on his head for a warm kit? Dude, he looked like one of those bear hats that they wear. Do you understand what I mean? It was like fully up like that. And I remember looking down at him being like, dude, is that what? I was like, have you got an Ortlieb bag on your head? And he's like, yeah. And I remember bursting out laughing. Do you know what I mean? It's like, we're in a cornfield in Afghanistan. It's like, there's threats everywhere, and like in the most tactical situation you could probably be in at that time for the context, and I'm pissing myself laughing. Yeah, it's just comedy, but like those little moments in time you can never replicate, you know. And I often choose to try and think about those moments a little bit more than I would do, you know, lingering on some of the horrific stuff that you go through, because without those moments of comedy and, you know, enjoyment and, you know, love that you have for one another in those situations, like without that glue, it's very easy for the rest of it to fall apart. So, you know, remembrance is twofold for me. It's remembering and honouring those that have fallen, remembering and being mindful of those that didn't fall but are still there, still in those shell scrapes, the families, the kids. Like, there's a whole bunch of guys now, and I know I'm not alone with this, that, you know, have watched kids grow up without dads, and they're now young men and young women. They're not babies anymore. Like, it's a different thing when it's like, oh, you know, and it was always the same, wasn't it? It was like, there's always the guy that's just been married or has just had a kid. It's always that way. It's always that, you know, and, you know, so-and-so, I remember we lost a guy well, we lost a lot, but one guy in particular, I'm not going to name him, but he had a brand new baby, and then, like, you kind of don't really think anything of it at the time, because I had a brand new baby, and, you know, it's not that I didn't care. It was just so much of it going on that it was just, I can't. I've normalised it. I've completely normalised it. And then through social media, or, you know, through the internet or whatever, you know, people connect the dots, and the community is quite small, and these kids have grown up. They're like 15, 16 years old now, or 14, 13 young people, and they've grown up their entire entire childhood without parents. So I remember that, and that's important to me, because that it's not just on the 11th where we should remember our fallen. We should remember those kids that are growing up every single day without a dad. No one to ask this. No one's going to teach that kid how to shave. Yeah. Not in the same way. Yeah. He's not there for the first bike ride or the birthdays or the football matches, or all that stuff was taken away from that kid. Yeah. Because his father was a commando and served his country and paid the ultimate price, the highest honour anyone could ever do. But that's what I try and remember on a daily basis. So yeah, it's always a mixed bag for me, of emotions when it comes to Remembrance Day. I think it's incredibly important that we maintain it and we never ever lose, appreciation for it. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
Like, to me, Remembrance is like, it brings our community together.
Yeah.
It's one massive community. It's one big day, which it shouldn't be. It should be, like you said, every day, where the community sticks together and supports each other. But this is where I feel like our Remembrance Day or our community should do that throughout the whole year and look after each other. Yeah. It's not just veterans; it's families as well. Like
100%, mate.
The kids and the wives and their husbands who have lost their partners and loved ones. It's all about just supporting each other and remembering the good times.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, and I think it doesn't help in today's narrative as well, where there's negativity around being patriotic. I think you only have to walk around the streets of London on the 11th, and you'll see how much patriotism there is in this country and what it means, and the people that are proud to wear their flag and represent their country aren't monsters. They're good people. They're people that are willing to have sacrificed everything in order to just give us the freedom that we appreciate in this country and take for granted, to be able to have an opinion, to be able to express difference, all of those things. Like those rights have been bought and paid for by the names, the names on the wall, and that should never be taken for granted. So hopefully, this, as it is every year, it's a gentle reminder to all of us as a nation and globally that the freedoms that we enjoy they're not free. They've been paid for, and the cost is expensive. And there are people, including families, young kids, that are still paying that cost to this day. There are guys that served on the beaches in Normandy. There are guys that from Normandy all the way to Helmand Province and back again. There are people that have paid and are still paying. So that's what we need to remember. Back then, wasn't it? It was like nobody really understood supplements at all.
It was just a bodybuilders thing, but
yeah, right.
And then you look at if you watch old documentaries like Behind the Lines, and all those MLs kind of running, they're all quite lean.
Yeah, they are.
But lads started. I think the way war fighting changed. Yeah. People they had to get a bit bigger.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
That's definitely where it changed.
Yeah, I think the job role changed slightly, didn't it? I mean, cardio is still. I still say cardio is still king for soldiers. Yeah. But you're right. Sports nutrition. Did I imagine this, mate? Or when we were nods, did they used to come down in the mornings when you were queuing up and hand out Mars bars?
Yeah.
They definitely did that, didn't they?
Yeah.
You used to get given Mars bars in the morning. That was true, right? Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you were skinny, you had to go and have 9 o'clockers, which was...
That's it.
Like bowls of cereal and apple crumble.
Yeah, apple crumble. Yeah, and pasta. Brilliant. 9 o'clockers, mate. Brilliant. Is that good to go, is it? Yeah. So I was just saying before, in fact, do you introduce yourself, mate, and then...
Okay, yeah, well, I'm James Malone, and former Royal Marine, and now a documentary filmmaker and director, and I know your man Jay over here from recruit training, both being injured, and then we both deployed on Op Herrick 9 with Zuna Company 4-5 Commando. So yeah, we go, and that's nearly 20 years ago. So
it's crazy, isn't it?
Go way back.
Yeah. It's I was just saying before, it's really nice and refreshing and it's something that I've not done enough of, especially the last sort of part of my career, and you know what it's like. You know, you're so busy. But even lads in different commando units that you were close with at one point, deployed with, you know, shared a patrol base with for 6 months, and then all of a sudden your career paths go slightly different, and you don't have that connection anymore, or you do, but it's not as frequent. And you know, so much time. People have kids, people have wives, people leave the military. You know, you branch off into all these different things, and it's really important, I think, to remember, you know, those guys that you shared those moments in time with, because I think if you try and avoid it, I think it doesn't do you any good. And I think just to reconnect, even if it's the simplest things like a text message or, you know, whatever it might be, I think there's a lot of weight in that. And I think part of remembrance for me is not just remembering, you know, the fallen, but remembering the lads that are still there, and you know, trying to maintain, you know, a level of connection with those guys, because I think once that connection falls away, finally, it's a very difficult place to come back from. I don't know what you think about that, but
you're right, mate. And it's funny you mention it, because I guess we reconnected through you know, becoming more prevalent on social media.
Social media,
yeah. And I enjoyed your writing on there, and I was like, hang on a minute, like, I know this geezer.
Yeah.
Recognised your eyes pretty much instantly, but didn't sort of like force the connection. It was just like, hey, I'm on here.
Yeah.
I know who you are.
Yeah.
Hey, that's all it was. And we caught up for a coffee, and like I said in the beginning, we hadn't met up for 20 years.
Yeah.
And that coffee was 3.5 hours long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that was actually quite special for me, because I think, you know, you walk in the room and a lot's happened in that time. You've gone on to do the great things that you've done. However, I felt like, well, now I know you.
Yeah,
you're like
100%, mate.
We were there at the start, so it's really good and grounding. And what I got from it was listening to your experiences sort of validated my own, which was actually quite powerful. And if I go to my career now as a filmmaker and leading into sort of the veteran aspect of those stories, two things that the filmmaking has taught me is one is reconnection and how valuable that is. There's a guy in a story that we're currently in production for who got injured, lost a leg on Op 9 with Zulu Company, and by his own admission, he was disillusioned, disenfranchised, disconnected. And the way he puts it was he didn't have his finger on the pulse, and he ended up getting into a lot of trouble and ultimately going to prison. And having connection back into our community has been really valuable for all of us. And then it's sort of the filmmaking. I had to go and document Remembrance. I had to go and answer some questions. And I hadn't done that for a decade.
No, I'm same.
I was too scared of it. I didn't like what it was stirring up, but it wasn't about me. It was bigger than me. That's what I realised. There was a troop officer talking to his men, and he said, the point of remembrance is to, we're talking about remembering your friends and the people you serve with, but his sentiment, which I loved, was it's remembering the fallen and staving off a second death, which is to be forgotten. Which that's like, so the two things to take away, it's keeping that finger on the pulse, which we're doing now a lot more, and it is just a text sometimes. You both get busy. And also, just staving off a second death to the people that did pay the ultimate sacrifice.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think like it's sort of in line with that. I think I've said it to you before, but like identity and purpose are the two things that you lose when you take the uniform off, I think, to a point. And I think there's ways and mechanisms that you can put in place to allow yourself to maintain a sense of who you were as well as who you currently are. And you know, I think a lot of guys make their entire personality, persona and character about being that guy, those flashes, that beret, that job, that lifestyle, that's who I am. And then when that's taken away, or you know, for whatever reason, aren't part of that organization anymore, then it's very easy, in my opinion, to just have a hard wall where you don't face anything back. You just put it in a box, leave it there, and slide it away. And I don't think that does anyone any good in the long term. So, you know, in order to maintain identity and purpose, sometimes you have to remember. And you're exactly like me. I said it before. I have never really looked forward to Remembrance Day. Even when I was serving, it always something didn't quite feel right about it. And I didn't really want to have to stand on a parade ground and listen to names of people that I'd loved and lost, or, and it wasn't disrespectful in any way. It was just that I'm still trying to do my job, and I'm still trying to focus and get up and put my body armor on. And it makes it very difficult sometimes, but you can't turn your back on it forever, and it's really, really important. And it's not about once you get to the point of maturity where it's not about you. I think when you're a soldier and it's Remembrance Day, you feel like you've got a part of ownership for it. As a civilian, I feel completely different about it because I'm not in the fight anymore. So now I'm that guy in, blue jeans and a t-shirt stood on the side of the road, and these guys are the ones in uniform marching down the road that are here to protect me. So I think you just sort of got to have a bit of appreciation for it, and just remembering that, like you said there, what makes it special and what makes it worth it is the fact that we still have it present in our mind. Like that would always be my biggest fear, is like you don't want to just be forgotten. And like those lads that we lost, and I know you've shared, incredibly difficult situations that that we've both been in different circumstances, but the same feelings, I'd imagine. Like it's a very difficult one, but you kind of have to remember it, because if you don't remember it, then the people that were involved in it kind of get forgotten about a little bit, and that's the biggest shame, isn't it? It's just making sure that we're present in that.
Yeah, I think there was a large part of me for I'm going to say over a decade that I kind of felt like Remembrance isn't just one day for me; it's 365.
I just said the same thing, mate. Remembrance Day is every day for the people that were involved in these conflicts, whether you were on the beaches of Normandy or you were in the fields of Helmand Province, or you're in Fob Gibraltar or Fob Jackson. It makes no difference. But like those moments in time there, that I don't know, it's something that we've all experienced, and it's really important to acknowledge that and to remember it in ways which we can make positive, because it's not just a negative thing. Remembrance should be for me. I made it a negative thing in my head. It was like it was like it was all. But actually, I'm trying to repurpose that now and use that to remember the funny times, the good times. The dudes that fall over on patrol. Those little moments in time that you get, that you've shared with somebody. It's important to remember those good things, because otherwise it becomes this big black cloud, and we've got to get ourselves out of it as individuals and as a group of as a generation. We've got to try and pull ourselves out of that sort of negativity, because if you go down that road for too long, and you forget about the good parts and the reasons why you joined, and all of these, these pure and healthy things. If you put too much in the negative basket and not enough in the positive basket, ultimately it'll steer your opinion on things, and you end up growing older and not really dealing with things properly. So I think remembrance for all of us, especially for guys that have served, and more importantly, I think their families, because it's not just us. It's not just the lads that were left out there. It was their families, the kids growing up without their dads. Like the kids of our generation now, if they were teenagers, now they're adults. If they were babies, now they're teenagers. Like, which is mind blowing. I remember a couple of individuals that had young kids, and like through social media, you see pictures of them, and they're not young kids anymore. They're young adults. Like, they're not far off being able to go and join the Marines themselves, or whatever it might be. So I always pay into that, and you're bang on. Remembrance Day isn't just the 11th of November. It's every single day for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's really important what you said there. But it's not negative. And you're right about it becoming a big black cloud, because it's almost like you have to do the reps with confronting the things that you think about, being vocal about it, and just sort of acknowledging it. As soon as you notice the way you feel, you can take action on it. And that's it. And whether that's
it's awareness, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. And being at Remembrance is often I think it's an easy way for people who find it difficult to confront things that they find difficult.
It's almost like a free kick, isn't it? It's a set. It's like you're allowed to do it there. It's like, but I think if we put all the emphasis on just one day a year, I think for the other days in the year and for the rest of it, it can be quite easy to box it back up.
Yeah.
Like, because the culture for Remembrance Day in the military was just a massive fucking piss up.
Yeah.
And it always got weird, and there was always somebody, and it was just, but it was accepted.
Yeah.
Every mess up and down the country on the 11th will be full to the brim of veterans, guys that are still serving, from all different cap badges, from all different, parts of the British Army, from, South Africa all the way to Southampton. There'll be people in there that are doing their own thing on Remembrance. And, for the most part, it's a good, wholesome, healthy thing to do.
Yeah.
But it's also that, if it's all coming out on one specific day, the one day that we're told that this is when we should be doing it, then you have to be mindful that it's probably happening at some point throughout the rest of the year for that individual in some way, shape or form. So I think it's a really good way for everyone to sort of almost come and check in, isn't it? It's almost like you're going to come and check in and this is where I'm at this year. And, it's that for that, I think it's a very positive thing. I think you can get a lot from it.
I think we can collectively steal a moment of reflection. By just going to your local cenotaph. It doesn't have to be a big one. Lots local cenotaphs have no one appear at them. There's one in so you support your local cenotaph if you can.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that.
And it's that it does end up in, and it should end up in people getting together and remembering the good times and remembering all the positive things about those people that can't spread their own message or don't have an opportunity to sharing the joy that ultimately we all got from 99% of the time
100%
in the military. That's what I feel like it is now. And it just took me a long time to accept that. What makes me, what I've realised is that often in the moment when we're on operations or wherever we are in a, it might be a disaster scenario. The Royal Navy are going to do those kinds of things and witness and help deal with a lot of trauma.
Yeah, the extraction of Afghanistan, the parachute regiment, that's like, well,
exactly.
Try and get your head around that.
Exactly. And I think, sorry, there's no point there. Yeah, so it's about, I completely lost my train of thought.
No, it's good. I think like, one of the things I think guys struggle with, especially when it comes to remembrance and dealing with emotions, is it's almost, to play devil's advocate on it, it's almost like I'm being forced to feel like sad and solemn today. And I don't need to stand there for 2 minutes and listen to the, please don't take this in a disrespectful way, but like, it doesn't take somebody playing the last post and 2 minutes of silence to make me feel and remember these people. They live with me every single day, and I've got 14 poppies on one arm from one deployment for a reason. So there's not, but I always felt a little bit guilty at times on Remembrance if I didn't feel as sad as I thought I should.
That's a very good point.
And I think that took me a long time to get. I almost felt like I was numb to it, and I'd lost my empathy, and that made me feel awful about myself. And I put a lot of guilt on myself for that because I thought it's like I should feel a lot worse than I do. Yeah. And right now I don't feel like that, but I think that was just my internal workings, my coping mechanism, because I was still in the fight. I was still going out and I was still preparing to deploy, or I was just coming back from a deployment. My war hadn't ended at that point. I'm talking about the latter stages of my career.
Yeah.
Or pretty much from Herrick onwards, really. So, I was too busy. I'd buried that box too hard and too fast and too deep for this prescribed time where everyone does it. I felt like I wasn't really part of it. Does that make sense? And I think, I look back at a conversation I had a minute ago, and it was the last sort of 4 or 5 Remembrance Day parades on my old camp. We'd always post a guard. Like we'd have military police there as well, but there'd always be some of the guys that were in and around would also be there to help out in security for obvious reasons. And I always volunteered for it every single time. And it was twofold. It was one, because I never felt comfortable putting on my medals and my uniform. And 2, I felt more comfortable and more at home and like I was in a better place to remember being sat in a vehicle with my kit on, with a loaded firearm, ready to react to something if it happened. And that's a really strange mentality, but having a look on it, it makes way more sense now than it did at the time. It was because I didn't have the courage to necessarily stand there and face all of these things. It was easier for me to hide behind that plate carrier, hide behind that weapon system, you know, and I was being a coward because I was scared of stepping into that and facing those emotions that I'd worked so hard to put in a box. I didn't want it to feel, or I didn't want to make myself feel like, okay, now's the time, Jay, to be sad. Now's the time to remember all these people. It's like, I can't remember them all. And I can't remember that guy's name. I know what his face looked like. I don't even remember, you know, and you start to feel guilty about it because there was so much of it at the time. It was like, I should have categorized this. This should all be in nice places in my head, and I should be able to understand it all. And I should, you know, and it just isn't like that. And it's too big of a problem, and it's too messy, and it's too much of it for me to be able to stand there and, you know, and really engage with it. So I think that's why I kind of backed off Remembrance for a while as well. But I do think that there is a lot of guys that feel guilty on Remembrance Day, and I think that it's not necessarily for something they did or didn't do on the battlefield. I think it's sometimes a level of guilt that they don't feel as strongly or as emotionally about certain things as they probably should as an outsider looking in. But I also think that that is a direct result and byproduct of the mentality needed and required for men to operate in those situations daily, after losing friends in combat, after watching people, you know, lose limbs and, you know, all sorts of other bits and pieces on the battlefield.
Yeah.
But you still have to put your kit on and go out on patrol the next day, don't you?
Yeah.
And I think that mentality that we have, that sort of inbuilt.
There's a performance aspect to it. You have to go out and perform. You have to put on your, you know, let's call it a Superman suit.
Yep.
Got to go and do the job now. And I think that actually there's a hangover from that when it comes to ceremonial duties, which is what it would be in the military. So there is a performance aspect to it, and you're conditioned to behave in that way. Otherwise, you'd never get out of the
fob,
never
mate.
get out of the vehicle. You'd never jump out of the helo or the plane or whatever. And I think that's what I realised in doing this job now is, and was the point I was going to make earlier on is like, no question, we went and would do the things that we were asked of us, or do the things that we thought were right, and have, you know, courage or courageous restraint in some aspects to not make certain decisions. But then when it comes to facing them when they are just a memory, and not present and not physical and can't harm us, it becomes very difficult.
Yeah, we're not trained for it though.
Yeah.
But we're not trained for it, and it's almost like, and that's the differences between what you're saying there, and you make a really good point, is the difference between facing an enemy on the battlefield and facing the enemy inside your own head is you have to face the one inside your own head alone. And there's no fire support there, and it's very difficult. Even when you speak to somebody about it, obviously it makes it a lot easier, but it's still your fight to fight, and ultimately no one's going to get you out of that situation. And I think for a lot of guys, myself included, it's easier to avoid it, to pretend it's not a thing, or to walk away from it, or to think you've got it in it. Sometimes it's better to keep the tiger in the cage. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like, because it can't hurt you in there.
Because you're scared of it, and I think
because you're scared of it.
For me, it used to manifest in just like random emotion.
Yeah.
Like some people get angry, I get quite sad, and like
I do.
You know, well up, and that, and you're like, what that's going on?
Yeah.
Supposed to be a tough guy.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, going back to your point about feeling guilty for not having emotion. Yeah. It just comes out in different. Yeah. You know, when you're walking down the street, get a pint of milk or whatever. Yeah. And like true story. And it is. I think you said by internalising it, you are facing it alone. By, like you said in the very beginning, just a flicking a message, just telling someone you're going on a 20-minute walk, like you guys do, like making it external and noticing that is massive. Yeah. Because you are creating a pattern and you're softening it, and you're easing yourself into it.
You're normalising it.
Normalising talking about it. And it's not going to, you know, a problem shared is a problem to have, and that's the tale as old as time, right?
Yeah.
So,
well put.
I think just by turning up to an event like Remembrance or a local cenotaph, or sitting on I was filming a guy who was building a Remembrance bench for an area that used to be a knacker's yard, and they trained all the horses for World War One. They don't have a cenotaph or ever bench. That's where someone can go and sit and reflect. It can be as simple as that. But it's an action. That's all it is.
I don't know about you, Boxy, but like I felt again going back to emotions connected to Remembrance Day, guilt comes back up again, and it's almost like I always felt, and I know you've said this to me and felt the same, and we had this same conversation, and I think this is going back to the point you alluded to before. It was actually healthy for both of us to sit down there, because I knew you when we were recruits in training. Like, the point being is that, like, I never really feel like I achieved anything in the military. I never really feel like, and on paper, yes, you can look at it and, and I know I'm not alone when I say this, and it doesn't make any sense, and people will look at it and go, Jay, you had the career that loads of people would have wanted, and, but to the guy that's on the street looking at the guy in week 15 of recruit training, the comparison is still the same. It's still the same. You're always looking up to somebody in the military, whether you're a civilian wanting to aspire to be, in the military, or you're in the military. It's like, you could be this guy, but you're always going to be looking to that guy, because I think a lot of us are just that way inclined mentally. And I always felt really guilty when people say thank you for your service. I don't know what to say to that. It doesn't really feel like I've done anything. And I think part of that is because I'm still here. I'm still able to do the things I've got. I'm still fully functioning. I've still got all my limbs. My brain is relatively clear, and I've got a full heart. So I'm winning. Like, no matter what happens, I'm winning. And it feels kind of guilty sometimes when you see these people that have given everything, life and limb for their country, and I didn't do that. Like, that's the one thing I never did. And I think a lot of guys struggle to accept praise, and I think a lot of guys struggle to acknowledge their service as the incredible thing that it was. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. It doesn't matter to me if you did 2 weeks as a recruit in the RLC or you did 20 years in the most high-speed tier 1 unit on the planet. The level of respect I've got now, and it's a newfound thing, I think, because I am a civilian, I think it's changed my narrative on it a little bit, is anyone that walks into a careers office willing to sign that piece of paper and, testify to that oath and serve their country for the right reasons, that level of sacrifice, service and patriotism should never, ever, ever be underplayed. And I think we're very good in the military at comparing ourselves, as I did 10 years and 5 tours. Well, I did 20 years and 10 tours. It's like there's always that mentality, isn't it? There always is. And I think it's really, really important that we're mindful, and, that I have tried to do it myself, is like, I should be proud of what I did for our country. Like, I should be. I don't always feel like that. I feel quite numb to it a lot of the time, but just making a more conscious effort as an individual to be thankful, but also to not to be arrogant, to remain humble, but to acknowledge the fact that I put a lot into something that I thought was a good thing. And I think, that's worth remembering on those days, for those guys that don't want to put their uniform on, for those guys that don't want to go to the Cenotaph in London. They want to go and sit on a park bench somewhere, or they just want to go to the pub, or they just want to be with their family, or, spend some time with their kids. Like, that's all right as well. Like, that's okay. But remember that you've served to protect this country, its values, its belief system, its cultures and its traditions. And I think that people, really, really should take more ownership of being proud of it, because if you don't do it, no one else will. Like, that's just the nature of the way the world is these days. So I think, just it's really important for guys to not beat themselves up, to not feel too guilty, which is a very hard thing to do, but also to be proud and to acknowledge the fact that whatever service you're in, whether it's Army, Air Force, Navy, Royal Marines, it makes no difference. And it doesn't matter what your job role, your spec, your rank, your LSA days were. Like, it's all irrelevant. None of it makes any difference, because at the end of it, we're all just going to be guys stood on the side of the road watching the next generation go through at some point in our careers, or our lifetime. So, I think those few things around remembrance are common for most veterans. I think there's a lot of guilt.
Yeah, there is. Yeah,
there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of awkwardness and sort of not really knowing how to feel about it, a lack of emotional intelligence sometimes, I think, speaking for myself. And then
I think what's helped me is I understood, because there's a lot of regrets, and a lot of shame and a lot of guilt.
Shame, yeah.
And it's all relative, I mean, I can imagine how like my career was 5 years, and how yours was 20.
18ish, yeah.
Let's call it 20, and Swedish rounding, and then
Swedes, we love the Swedes.
But I feel like probably the guilt is probably matched to an extent.
Mate, I've learned this, and I tell you what, Roxy, mate, you've hit the nail on the head there, and it's probably the most important thing we've said, we've had in this conversation, is something that took me a long time to learn, and something that's been really valuable to me and actually humbling to me, is that empathy is something that I definitely didn't have, but also you cannot compare trauma to trauma. Like it makes no difference. Like, and it's not in our culture. It was like you had to have been in the worst gunfight. You'd done more Kazovacs, more ID blasts, more deployments, more jumps, more this, more that, and then finally you'd reach this promised land where you'd be satisfied with yourself. It doesn't exist. It's not a thing.
No, there's no arrival. As soon as you accept that, the easier it is to live your life and understand.
100%.
It's a period of your life that you can take a lot from, because you commit to something, and you did the things you said you were going to do, and you served for the others around you, and that period of life ultimately comes to an end for some people abruptly. Some people would choose to change, and then your commitments change, and that's part of life. And I think there's no arrival, and looking back on it and ultimately having joy in it, and seeing the value in connections we now have, and the ability to even go to these ceremonies, and the honour to be able to reflect upon it.
Just to be able to get out of your bed.
Yeah.
Make your bed in the morning and breathe air. Like just those little small things, and
you still have the opportunity. I think I spoke to a lot of people about all of these subjects we've covered today, and you ultimately sort of still have a duty, and that's to each other. And if that's why Remembrance is also important. It's continuing to serve the next generation and your generation. And just going back to the documentary, that guy saying, just keeping your finger on the pulse, I'll see you right.
And don't, especially for young guys now, my advice would be is don't, especially this next generation. I spent a bit of time at Limster recently in a 40 Commando, and it's the same faces, Roxy. It's the same faces looking back at us that that I remember being in those halls. I remember being in Termini Hall at 40 Commando and seeing those faces looking back at me. I was one of those guys, and it's not changed. And I think it's really important that this next generation of lads that haven't had the opportunity yet to go out and do their thing on the battlefield, which I'm sure they will, and I've got absolutely zero doubt in my mind that they're doing an incredible professional job, because that's what the training's there for. I believe in trusting the training, I really do. But it's like, we've got to stop comparing ourselves to other guys, because there is, once you get to that level, there's nothing positive that come from that. It's when we were in training, it was the guys, maybe a couple of guys that had done maybe the early Iraq invasion, but it was generally like a lot of Northern Ireland guys, and those Northern Ireland guys would have had guys that were in the Falklands before them, and it just goes on and on and on and on and on, and it doesn't serve anybody to try and compare conflict times and times of deployments, etc., to other people, because that serves no good. And having been fortunate or unfortunate, however you look at it, to have served in multiple, I think I've ticked all the boxes there. And again, going back to that point, is don't look at people's careers on paper, because on paper, yes, it might be this or it might be that, but it means nothing compared to the bigger picture and what everyone else has done. We've all done that stuff, so you can't compare trauma. That's my point, is that you don't try and compare to other people's achievements, and then most importantly, his gunfight was probably just as bad as your gunfight. You know what I mean? And even if it wasn't, you don't know how it's affected that individual. So once you're hurt and you're wounded, you're hurt and you're wounded. It doesn't matter what's caused it or the level of it. The baseline setting of being hurt and wounded is it's a leveler for all men,
I had this conversation with someone last week, and they were, I was on R&R, they were point man, they got injured. And it was a serious enough injury they got blown up. I mean, a serious enough injury to go over. And there was an element of guilt there, but they didn't come back. It's just like, excuse me, mate, you've done enough. You've done more than enough. Well,
I had this.
Do not worry about it. You're a good lad.
Yeah, mate. But guys will beat themselves up for years about this, and then they'll turn up on Remembrance Day in their uniform. They'll get blind drunk. It'll all come out, and then all of a sudden they go back to their wives, their families, and then it doesn't happen for another year. We need to be better at engaging during the middle ground as opposed to when it gets to that final place. Right. And it's such a common theme, because I was having a conversation with Captain John White, who was my troop commander on. Herrick, and he stepped on an ID, and he was very seriously injured. And when we sat down, I sat down with my troop sergeant as well, a guy called Lee Waters, who was shot in the face. It just so happened that I'd Kazabak both of them, so there was all three of us. It was the troop sergeant, just me, and the troop commander, and we all sat down and we all talked about the same shared experiences, all had a completely different perspective on it, but we all felt guilt for one thing or another. And I sat there looking at, John in particular, and I was like, I said, why on earth would you feel guilty? And he goes, because when I was in the helicopter being lifted out, he goes, I knew I was that injured that I wouldn't go back, so I wouldn't be able to lead you guys for the rest of the deployment. And I was like, brother, you've sacrificed 3 of your limbs for your country. You've done enough, dude. But his mind was not on that. His mind was on the back of a CH-47 on a Mert bird, being medevac back to Bastion, touch or go whether this guy's going to live. And the only thing he's thinking about is how guilty he was has left the troops. That's something that, as a culture and as a community, this guilt that we're all sharing, this shame that we're all sharing, it's got to be addressed, and it's got to be gone. Because if we don't do it, then we're just going to see more and more of these guys lose it. We're going to lose more of them to suicide. And, let's have it right. We're losing too many guys to mental health, to suicide, to self-sabotage, whether it's drinking, drugs, womanizing, gambling, all these vices, all these things that the guys do to get out of their system. And a lot of it becomes we can't look ourselves in the mirror for certain reasons, rightly or wrongly, mostly wrongly, because we feel guilt, we feel shame, or we feel numb to stuff. And these are all byproducts of the emotional infrastructure that we had to put in place in order to be able to survive on a daily basis in a combat zone, and to be able to repeat that for week after week, month after month, year after year in some cases, decade after decade for some people, So it's like these coping strategies and mechanisms we've got work fantastic on the battlefield. They serve us really well when we're in the culture and the community of the military. But when we step outside of that and it's no longer required to be as protective, we've got to slowly start to let these walls down a little bit and slowly start to unpack what's in that box. And we can't do it alone. It never works to turn your back on it. But it's really, really, really fucking important that guys recognise, and like you said before, but beautifully, it's awareness of it. There's a tiger in that cage somewhere, and it wants to get out. You got to let it out at some point, So I think all these emotions get stirred up around Remembrance Day, and it becomes very clear, and I think it's a lot easier when you see somebody else that's in that same position. And today's the day we're supposed to be in that position, and I'm in that position as well. And I think that's what bonds us closer together. But my only thing on it would be, my main takeaway is that Remembrance Day is 365 days of the year for those that were involved. And as a community, we've just got to keep our eye on each other a little bit better on that, I think. But,
Yeah, I guess to end on that, It was difficult, but I took a few steps to actually get some help where friends were suggesting it, and got helped out by various charities. I was probably a battalion charity or an association that can signpost you to it, but for me it was the Royal Marines charity and Rock to Recovery who I didn't put my hand in my pocket, and they
looked after you.
Completely changed and I guess evolved my mindset towards it and give me a really fresh perspective, and that has been life-saving. Yeah,
it literally is, mate. And all those charities out there doing such good things. The RM charity was one that we got involved with fairly recently. Incredible, humbling to be to have anything to try and contribute positively. Because they give so much back. And I think we're doing a better job as a community as losing that stigma of being like, I might need to take a little knee here now, but for 5 minutes and just get back on track, And I think these organisations do a fantastic job of welcoming people in and not making you feel, you know, marginalised or, you know, stigmatising it too much to the point where guys are like, no, I'd rather not. I'd rather go to the pub and deal with it. Like, that ain't always going to work. I mean, there's a time and a place for that, but that ultimately you still got to do it properly. And these organisations are fucking incredible at doing that. So yeah, good effort on that.